So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Simone Anter. I'm a staff attorney at Columbia Riverkeeper. And today, Riverkeeper introduces two Hanford downwinders whose stories are included in the Hanford Plaintiffs, Voices from the Fight for Atomic Justice, winner of the 2020 San Francisco Book Festival for History and the New England Book Festival for Nonfiction Writing. So this interview exclusive comes as a follow-up to our last webinar where we spoke to Kate Brown, author of Plutopia, Nuclear Families, Atomic Cities, and the Great Soviet and American Disasters, Tricia Pritikin, author of the Hanford Plaintiffs, and Karen Dorn-Steele, the investigative reporter who broke the stories of cancer and serious illness downwind and downriver of Hanford. So the first story in the Hanford Plaintiffs is that of Charlotte Ray McCormick, mother of Bob McCormick, who is here on our webinar today to share her story. Charlotte grew up in Broadman, Oregon, in a house alongside the Columbia River. Unbeknownst to Charlotte and her family, the waters of the river, used by the family for irrigation, drinking water, boating, and swimming, held the radioactive byproducts of plutonium production released from the Hanford Nuclear Weapons Facility upstream in eastern Washington. Multiple members of Charlotte's family later developed cancer and other diseases likely related to their exposure to radiation contained in the river or to airborne radionuclides released over the area from Hanford. Tricia, Hanford downwinder and author of the Hanford Plaintiffs, will interview Bob. Karen Dorn-Steele will interview Tom Bailey, the Hanford area farmer who, in the mid-1980s, first alerted Steele to cancers and heart attacks reported amongst his neighbors in farming communities across the Columbia River from Hanford. We'll start with footage from Coin TV in Portland of a story done in the 1990s about the McCormick family, their exposure to Hanford's radioactive waters, and the suffering health faced today by multiple members of the family as the likely result of their exposures.
Thank you, Simone, very much for the introduction. I am going to be interviewing Bob in just a second, but before we start, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Deb Abramson, who is a longtime activist on the Spokane Reservation, who died at sunrise on New Year's Day at age 66 of a cancer she believed to be caused by her exposure as a child, playing with steel balls used for crushing uranium ore, along with her time working at the Dawn site. Deb was a founder and longtime director of SHAL Society, which stands for Sovereignty, Health, Air, Water, and Land. She had long worked for environmental justice on the Spokane Reservation as it deals with the aftermath of uranium mining at the Midnight and Sherman mines on the reservation and of uranium processing at the Dawn Mining Company mill site in Ford. She will be missed.
I'm happy that my family was here and everything, and I was raised here. I have roots here. But it does kind of, it's a little unsettling to be here.
Bob McCormick returns to the river of his boyhood. While his home in Boardman is gone, memories of the gorge remain. But they've been colored by news that broke just last month, that during his childhood, the Columbia River was contaminated by radioactivity, 3 times the level now considered safe.
It makes me very upset. And it makes me very, curious to know, to find out how this affected my family.
What makes McCormick so curious is the condition of his family. His mother died of leukemia in 1993. She was just 55. His sister has been diagnosed with cancer. She's 37. And as he looked at others in his family, including his grandfather and uncle, he found cancer too. What all his family members have in common is the Columbia. They played in it, fished from it, drank from it. All during the years the government admits it was flushing high levels of radioactive water from the Hanford nuclear weapons reactors just upriver. These home movies used to bring fond memories. Now they bring other feelings.
A feeling of helplessness to know that people lived here innocently, assuming that this river was clean and playing in it, water skiing, fishing, and that they could have been swimming in a pool of death.
Losing his mother was the hardest part.
She was like everything to us. And then when she died, it was, our worlds just fell apart.
McCormick wants to know what's killing his family. For years, the government denied a link. But doctors who are studying the question say it's hard to ignore the evidence.
So people swimming in the Columbia River found warm water.
Warm water right from the reactor, says pathologist Dick Belzy. The water was hot in radioactive terms too, but no one would ever know it until it was too late.
The real legacy that we have is a government that made decisions about us in secrecy. People like the downwinders really are casualties of the Cold War.
Doctors like Belzy say McCormick may never know if he or his family are indeed casualties for sure. Funding for studies about radiation is precarious. In Boardman, population 2,200, locals have talked about it for years, living downriver from one of the most radioactive places on Earth. City fathers are concerned about sediment containing dangerous levels of radionuclides and the possibility they could be stirred up by large water releases upstream.
I believe in our safety, and I believe that, you know, in our country's defense and everything, but I think it's very irresponsible, you know, to leak radioactivity in the river, especially when there's people downriver that are going to drink the water and play in the water, and I'd like to know, why didn't they stop it?
I have some questions here for you, Bob.
Okay.
First, if you don't mind, the first question was, how did you first learn about the radiation releases into the air and the waters of the Columbia from Hanford?
I heard about it, and thank you for allowing me to be here. I appreciate it. I heard it when my mom got diagnosed with lymphoma. I think it was in about '88, I think it was, and then she got better, and then in '93 she got a different form of leukemia, and she passed away on December 18th of '93. And I heard about this I was watching the news, I think, and I saw something about Hanford and Boardman and radiation, and so that made me curious, and so I contacted them. They told me about these groups that people met, that I attended some groups, and then they offered to go to Boardman to do a story on my family, and so I'm not sure exactly how long it was. Then we went to Boardman, and that's when they did the story. So I heard it from the news.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, must have been kind of a shock to start to put the two together.
Oh, the shock was just starting.
Yeah, just starting, that's right. So your mom, Charlotte Ray, was born in Emmett, Idaho. What year was she born?
1938.
38. And when did her family move to Boardman, Oregon?
Around 1944.
44,
So,
right when operations were starting at Hanford then.
mm-hmm.
Okay. And I understand Boardman is right near the Columbia, is that right?
Yes, Boardman is right near the Columbia. It was actually closer at the time, and then when they built the I think it was the John Day Dam, they had to move the people in the city south, I believe, but they were still really close to the river right there.
How downriver Boardman is from the Hanford facility?
I don't know exactly.
Okay. It's pretty close,
20,
though.
30 miles. I'm not
Yeah.
sure exactly.
Okay. Now I want to ask you some questions about your mom's mom and dad. So your maternal grandmother and grandfather.
Yes.
Tell us about your grandma. Yeah.
My grandma was a very strong woman. She loved her family. She loved getting together. She loved cooking. She loved outdoors. She loved family gatherings and cooking. I mean, we had big cookouts and barbecues and all kinds of things. She was a restaurant owner there, a partner in a town nearby, Aragon, I think, Aragon. But she was a very strong woman.
So she's well known around town if she was running a restaurant there, yeah.
Well known. They had a ranch and they had cattle.
They have a cow, which they got
They had
milk.
a cow. We
Yeah.
got milk from. They got milk from. They had sheep. Um, they had some vegetables and things like that. And my grandpa also he did construction and aside from farming as well.
So they were both downwind of Hanford and right along the radioactive Columbia River. So they're getting a couple exposure pathways plus drinking milk straight from the cow, which makes the
Yes.
radioiodine content higher. So it's various exposure routes. Now, did any other family members work on the construction of the Mcnairy Dam?
Yes. Two, besides my grandfather, I had my two uncles on my mom's side, two uncles from my dad's side. And I'm not sure exactly, but there was like 4 or 5 of them that worked on Mcnairy.
Okay. And did your mom and dad continue living in Boardman after they married?
For a while, until about 1965 or 6, we moved to the outskirts of Portland.
So I take it then that you and your 3 sisters grew up there in Boardman and then in Portland, right? Okay.
Right. I
Did
was
you,
a few years.
okay.
But I'm sorry.
Did you swim or boat in the Columbia at all?
Constantly. I mean, my dad had a red truck with a boat, and I have pictures of that if you would like. We would go. I have even the old 8mm film of like I think I sent you of people jumping in the river, swimming, fishing, holding up fish that we caught, and it was a big ordeal. I mean, for people that don't know, the area is very warm in the summertime. It's an arid area, right? I mean, it's pretty hot, and the river was just a lifeblood there.
Yeah, nice and cool and refreshing, and so you ate fish out of the river as well. So you got another exposure route. Okay. Do you know if your family used the river waters for irrigation or drinking?
Yes, we did.
Did both? Yeah.
Did
Okay.
both.
Okay, now I read from your story and just reviewed it before the interview here to make sure I have my facts right. In 1988, your mom began to experience strange health problems. Can you tell us about her first symptoms?
Fatigue. She was really tired. She couldn't eat very much, couldn't keep stuff down. And she was sleeping a lot. And she didn't talk much about her suffering. She wasn't the kind of person that would, complain very much.
Yeah. But it was a big contrast to her usual stuff, right?
Yes.
Something was wrong.
Yes.
Okay. And then the diagnosis, as I understand it, was large histocytic malignant lymphoma, which is a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yes.
And she also had autoimmune hypothyroidism, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So she had this combination of diseases going on suddenly.
And it's just not combination. It was, they tried many remedies for this, and it wasn't working. It came down to the last hope was that she had two brothers that came, one from Eastern Oregon and one from the coast. They would come 3 times a week and give platelets, have to draw blood out and take platelets and give to her and hope that it took. And eventually her platelet levels started rising and she started to get better eventually.
Yeah, okay.
For a while.
So did she have radiation and chemo at that time too?
Yes.
Yeah, that was and the platelets. And then 6 weeks later, what happened? She'd been discharged?
She was discharged, and then it was several years later that she got diagnosed. She started having health problems again, started feeling tired, and she got diagnosed with, you have the technical name for it right there.
Acute myeloid leukemia?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Cancer of blood cells, which both lymphoma and leukemia result from problems with white blood cells. Okay. Yes. So this time, what sort of treatments did they try for her?
They tried radiation again. They tried some experimental chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And I was spent a month in the hospital watching her suffer. I helped her. I had to help her. I didn't have to, but help her because to the bathroom, and she was just falling, dying in front of me, and it was just I
Yeah.
don't know how to.
I just, having lost both my parents from very aggressive cancers that I believe were related to Hanford, I can relate to that. And it was horrible. I'll never forget it, ever. I mean, I can't describe it sometimes. So it sounds like nothing was working, even though they tried an aggressive experimental leukemia medication. And you're saying that she went into a coma, correct?
Yes.
Finally.
Well,
And then when did she pass away?
December 18th, around 4:18 in the afternoon, or 4 in the afternoon on December 18th, 1993.
You remember that forever too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. She was real important in your family.
Yes, she was. She was involved in her community.
Yeah.
Her husband, my stepdad, was involved in the community. My grandmother on his side had gotten the Selwood paper in Portland's Woman of the Year Community Achievement Award, and she'd
Yeah.
been involved in the community community centers and things like that. So it was
Yeah.
a big shock.
Right. Well, what you're doing now and speaking out like this is huge. And I'm sure you're helping her, and she would be so proud of you for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about, you have a lot of people in your family who lived in that area who've had cancers. And so I went back through your story in the book, and I see that your maternal grandma died of a cancer, correct?
Uterine cancer. No, she didn't die of uterine cancer. She had uterine cancer,
Okay.
and they ended up removing it.
Okay.
And then,
so your maternal grandmother had uterine cancer. Your maternal grandfather died of lung cancer in 1961. Yes. Your mother's oldest sister had some health problems too, right?
She had lupus, died of lupus.
When she was pretty young too, right?
At 50. Yes, at 50.
You have so many people in your family that are impacted at something. Your mother's oldest brother, what
Stomach
happened?
cancer. He had stomach cancer when he was around 60.
Wow. So, huge
And
numbers of people with cancer.
And these are all strong people. He
Yeah.
was a Korean War vet. He quit smoking. He was a farmer. He worked all the time. He was in shape. And then all of a sudden, around 58 or so, boom.
Yeah. And these are young deaths. These are not older.
Yes.
Yes. And then talking about you and your siblings, you have 3 sisters.
Yes.
And your 4 siblings and your children have all had health issues. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. My oldest sister, she she was diagnosed with some forms of gynecological cancers. She ended up having the majority of her internal parts removed, has a colostomy bag. Then my second oldest sister had a hysterectomy. And then the sister right above, these are all older than me, the sister right above me has fibromyalgia. And I'm 57 now. Around 45 years old, my health just went down. I started having ulcerative colitis, diabetes. I had a heart attack, different health things. And my oldest sister, her son, healthy life till he's about 40, started having heart problems. Now he's being tested for heart palpitations and things like that. My second oldest sister has a daughter who's in the book, in your book, my niece, who was diagnosed at like 25 years old, about 10 years ago, with the same AML as my mom. Her oncologist told her that the to have the same diagnosis of AML in the same family is she's never seen it. I don't know if I'm quoting that right. I think so.
So that's AML is acute myelogenous leukemia, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The same exact form. There's something in there so rare. And she now has another condition which is attacking her kidneys.
Yikes. Why?
She also has a child. Now she has a child with that. I don't know what the correct term is, but she's developmentally
delayed.
Yes.
I see. Boy. Whew.
So
wow,
I'm not sure if it's all affiliated, but it is awfully strange coincidence that cancer kind of things can, you know.
Right. Well, when you add up all those exposure routes and all those health issues, it's highly suspicious.
Very.
Okay. Now, just this is sort of a broad question that I wanted to kind of finish up with here, and that is, what do you want people to know about the human cost of Hanford operations on your family and the people of the Pacific Northwest?
Well, I want people to know about Hanford. You know, I think I used to want an apology from the government, but I want more than that. Because as I look up all this research, I start researching and I find out that there was 177 underground tanks built at Hanford, and they're leaking and they're releasing radiation in the water. I want people to know that that's unsafe and to be aware of that and to look into that. But I have something here I'd like to say that will sum it all up. If I can read a short paragraph.
Yeah.
And this is from it says Volume 1, Health Effects of Low Level Radiation. It was from hearings, staff of House Committee on Interstate and Foreign Commerce and Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, 96 Congress, The Forgotten Guinea Pigs in 1980. The report concluded, because the agency charged with developing nuclear weapons was more concerned with that goal than with its other mission of protecting the public from injury, the government totally failed to provide adequate protection for the residents of the area. In addition, the government's program for monitoring the health effects of the test was inadequate, and more disturbingly, this is why I want more than apology, more disturbingly, all evidence suggesting that radiation was having harmful effects, be it on the sheep or the people, was not only disregarded, but actually suppressed. Mm-hmm. Here's the sentence that stuck out to me. The greatest irony of our atmospheric nuclear testing program is that the only victims of the US nuclear arms since World War II have been our own people. And we are witnessing that.
Yeah.
And the Warner Amendment, you know about the protections that it gives the government, which throws off these contractors. And I want that changed to where, like you've talked about, so that contractors like DuPont, who has a history since 1802 of making gunpowder and arms and chemical weapons and things like that, to be held accountable rather than paying off the lawyers and the courts and all that stuff with taxpayers' money.
Right. Exactly.
And so.
Yeah. That's right, Bob. Yeah.
And these are real people. They're not just figures. And if you think that, I would like you to see that map of the US to see if you think you're safe. And here's a disturbing thing, Tricia. I quoted last thing, if you don't mind.
No, please.
Is this right here. It's from Wikipedia. It says, an example, plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,100 years, right? But I didn't read this part. And a decay of 10 half-lives is required before a sample is considered to cease its radioactivity. I read that as 240,000 years before it can be tested, before it can be considered to cease its radioactivity. 241,000 years.
Yeah.
So this is not somebody just going, oh.
No. And telling your story, and all of us telling our stories, is the best evidence that is available and is possible to show the hazards of nuclear weapons production and testing. and sometimes reactor accidents. People downwind of reactor accidents can end up with a lot of health problems too. So
Yes.
thank you, Bob. This has been a very, very
Thank you,
interesting,
Trisha.
meaningful, and thank you for speaking out like you're doing. You're very articulate, and your story is amazing.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to interview Tom Bailey, a person that I have known now for 37 years. And Tom was really the first person to put a real human face on the Hanford Downwinder story. But Tom, I'd like to start at the beginning with you. When were you born? Now, tell me about who your parents were and a bit about your childhood and the illnesses you had. But first start with when were you born?
March 10th, 1947.
And who
My
were your
parents were
parents?
Maynard and Laura Lee Bailey. He was honorably discharged U.S. Army 1945. She was an employee of the U.S. Corps of Engineers, and she was transferred to the Manhattan Project, and she was a stenographer for the Robert Oppenheimer and other famous scientists. She returned in 1946 when my father had a family reunion. They fell in love. She became pregnant. She lost the baby. Then she became pregnant again and had me. I was born with what was the diagnosis? Rickets, crooked legs. I was a sick child. I couldn't keep the milk down, mother says, and my teeth rotted out early at age 5. Well, we'll talk about those later.
Were you, weren't you in an iron lung for a while as a child also?
Okay, here we go. I was a sick child, and I was in an iron lung when I was 4.5 years old. Paralyzed. I started the first grade in 4 scump leg braces, and I was born with those birth defects. And I was sick all my life with asthma and bloody noses and just an unhealthy child. I remember in teenage years after surgery on my leg to straighten legs, my hair falling out 2 different times. And to this day, I still have the effects of my birth. I was born with 1 testicle, and I still only have 1 testicle. You've never heard that before, but I'm sharing it today.
That is an amazing amount of health of injuries to a young child. How did your parents end up in that farming area around Mesa Basin City and Ringgold? I mean, when did they acquire land there?
My father became a worker for my cousin, Lone Bailey. It was his cousin, and he was working on the fields and found a lot of abandoned. A lot of the land was abandoned. There were no people there. All downwind in Hanford, it was called the buffer zone. They bought up all the farmers who lived there, and they left. And my father saw that my uncle was just ceding the land, and he didn't own it. So he got a hold of the Bureau of Reclamation, and Mr. Coons leased my father 12,000 acres the government had. And we started farming it, and then Dad bought a few pieces here and there. And that's how we got started farming.
And your land, as the crow flies, how many miles was your farm from Hanford? It's on the other side of the Columbia River, on the east side. Hanford facilities were on the west side. But how far were you from the nuclear reservation?
The Westfields were up against the fence of Hanford
So just
Reservation.
about as close as you could be.
Just about as close as you could be, yeah. And they used to have soldiers that would patrol the fence line. They'd walk the fence line. I figured out where they came from. They had a Nike installation out there. It was under a hill. We couldn't see the base, but it was a pretty big base, Camp Hanford.
Now,
so we had our own milk cow. We drank our own milk cow. We saw our own pigs.
There, you were drinking milk directly from the cow. Where were you getting your water?
From a well. The farm that we moved into had a well.
So as you grew up, were there any signs that the people at Hanford across the river from you were interested in you and your neighbors?
Oh, sure. They were always interested. They'd come to the farm and ask for duck heads and goose legs. We were waterfowl hunters. Father shot a lot of waterfowl, and they picked up dead baby pigs, and they asked us questions about what we eat. And one day they brought me a pair of red cowboy boots. But they were always there, testing the milk, testing the water, taking well samples. They did that all the way up to today.
Did they ever explain why they were there? Why they were taking all of these samples?
Oh yeah, they said they were testing the air so that we knew we were safe. And they were testing for samples for radiation, and they would let us know if they found anything, but they never told us anything. They just took the samples and left. One of my first memories as a child is seeing soldiers walking across our field behind men in spacesuits, waving sticks in front of them. Soldiers had shovels and sacks. They walked right by the house. Never saw them again. Mother said to just stay in the house and don't ask any questions.
Well, that would have been in the 1950s, Tom? You think that was in the 1950s?
Yeah. Late 49, 50.
We learned later that there were lots of process upsets at Hanford and also routine emissions. So, the documents that we later obtained showed that they were picking up hot particles in the farm around where you lived, and other particles that fell on the farmland where you lived. Now, you and I met in Spokane, in 1984. We met at a reception for Spokane's Congressman Tom Foley. And I'd been doing some reporting on recent problems at the Purex plant, which was a plutonium plant that had just opened. This was 1984. It had just been reopened by the Reagan administration in 1983. And it was having problems. But what was it that prompted you? We just met, at this cocktail party. What prompted you to invite me down to meet your neighbors?
Alcohol. I remember I had too much to drink, and I remember very clearly you took me up to the top of the stairs. I had a bottle of wine in my hand, and you were being kind to me because I was making noise downstairs, and Mrs. Foley asked you to take care of me. And I remember you asking me, "You live down there by the Hanford, don't you?" I said, "Sure do." And then you asked me, "Did you ever notice anything odd around Hanford?" I looked at you and I thought, now here's a serious person. She's pleasant. I'm going to have some fun with her. "Oh, you aren't one of those anti-nuclear kooks, are you?" "No," she said. And I said, "Well, Hanford, all it ever does is kill or deform a few sheep every once in a while." And you said, "Oh, really?" Next thing I know, I get a call from you wanting to know if you can come down and visit with the neighbors, which we did.
Yeah, you really got me there, Tom. It really piqued my curiosity because I did know some about the fallout from the atomic bomb tests in Nevada and how sheep were harmed and how the government covered that up. I already knew that. It took me a little while to get go ahead from my editors to be able to come down and see you. We met in December of '84, and it was probably the spring. I think it was the spring of '85 because they were a little skeptical. They said, "Well, Hanford officials have always told us that everything's perfectly safe," but I persuaded them to. I said, "Well, we'll never know if there's anything there unless you let me go down and look." And so that's what I did. And you took me around. You introduced me to your neighbors. What did we learn in that first visit down there from your neighbors?
Well, we learned that 25 out of 27 of my neighbors on the death mile had cancer, deformed babies, or miscarriages. We learned that the health was horrible. And we also knew that they weren't genetically related because they were all veterans that drew the land. They put a name into a drawing, and Mr. Coons drew their names out of the drawing at the Freight of Washington and awarded them with 80 acres of land apiece.
Most of these farm families came in the 50s. That's right.
The
So-
conditions was you had to be married and you had to live on a farm and you had to have a garden.
Mhm, mhm. So yeah, you did it hit you then that this might, when we talked to so many people and they were telling us over and over and over about their health problems, did it hit you then that this might be a serious issue beyond a few sheep?
Well, it didn't hit me until you and I were driving down Glade Road and we turned right on Ringgold Road. And all of a sudden it hit me. I thought, my God, that's what's the problem with my childhood health. That's why I was so sick all the time. Had to take that damn thyroid medication pill every morning.
And that was because your mom knew about that and she made you take it. Is that right?
She sure did. None of us kids' thyroids are bad, but we've all had cancers called skin cancers, and my sisters have had breast cancer and they've had colon cancer, and one of my father's three brothers and his sister all died with cancer. His parents died with cancer. We all ate out of the same garden and drank out of the same milk.
Well, thanks to your introducing me to all these people, I was able to publish my first story in July of '85 about your farm community. It was called Downwinders Living with Fear, and it also it focused on the Andrew Jeske family that who were keeping a death map of all the problems that you just related, both cancers and early heart attacks among their neighbors. And then you also took me to visit other people who told us about the mysterious deaths of hundreds of mummified lambs born in 1962. And they had farm records to show that the major losses of their sheep. So that when that story came out, it had a big impact on the region because, you know, the plutonium processing had just started back again 2 years earlier. How did your neighbors react to that story and to the news that, you know, you might have been affected by Hanford production?
Well, the healthy ones were angry. The sick ones were said, go ahead, keep asking questions. The dying don't talk and the unborn don't have nothing to say. So the majority of the people were really pissed off at me. And the Hanford workers created an organization to paint me as a bad guy called Hanford Family. And Michael Fox made it his chore to discredit anything and everything I was saying. He labeled me a storyteller, and I thought, you know, that's right. I am a storyteller. I'm not a scientist. I don't know nothing about plutonium. I don't know nothing about atomic power. I'm just a damn dumb farmer. But I got a story to tell, Michael, and you can just shove it. You can listen to it.
Well, it turned out, Tom, that your story was right, because remember, this is July of 1985, and the next February 1986, the government, based on, you know, lots of pressure, my reporting, some other reporters in the region, activist groups like the Hanford Education Action League in Spokane, the government was forced to release its first big stack of environmental monitoring documents from Hanford from the 40s and 50s and 60s, which had been kept secret until that time. And they validated what you'd said. There were massive doses from Hanford. And then so when that first stack of papers was it came out, the government said that it would evaluate these documents. It would consider doing health studies. So did that make you a sudden hero in the farm towns near Hanford? You know, I mean, you were right. This document showed that you were right.
Well, those documents did show that there were some problems, and I was right, but it really didn't affect the farm community. They just were only worried about selling their French fries and their sugar beets and their wheat. They were just. It's an interesting environment around here. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Everybody's scrambling over a piece of land. The acreage limitations came off last year, and so now all these big corporations are in here buying up this irrigated farmland.
Yeah, there was significant worry about the impact on crops. Even I remember some Japanese inspectors came over and talked to you guys closely about whether your crops were safe to eat in Japan. So that was a legitimate concern. So, yeah. Okay, so It
I
goes
never
on.
found out.
Go ahead.
I never found out what the final results of those tests were either.
Which tests?
The
Crop test?
Japanese test. Yeah.
But they did keep buying your product.
The government, yeah. The government ran small irrigated farms in the 1940s and 50s downwind. One of them was next door to what's called the wind erosion farm, where the Dad and my Uncle Wayne used to laugh about the people that came there from Hanford. They didn't know anything about farming. They had stunted crops. The beans, lima beans, and the peas, and carrots were no good. They were terrible farmers. Well, now I know they weren't using fertilizer because they were sucking up the radionuclides into the cells of the root plants. They were scattered all over downwind, and the biggest one is still there. It's the Washington State University Research Farm at Hanford. At Othello.
Well, you know, there was a whole process that went on to try to look at these documents. There was a struggle between the states of Washington and Oregon on one side, and then the federal government on the other side about who would control the document reviews and the health studies. But in 1990, the Energy Secretary, the Federal Energy Secretary, James Watkins, had a big press conference, and he said, it's true that we likely harmed the downwinders, and we have to go back and find out what actually happened to them. When he said that, when they said, yes, there's a real problem here, how did you feel? Were you hopeful at that point that they might get to the bottom of all the health problems in your area?
Yes, very helpful, very hopeful. I thought it was wonderful. Till I found out how they were doing it. They made the study to vindicate them. I had one lady call me from the dryland farm area. She said they came to my farm and asked for our health studies, Mr. Till's group. And she said they took down all the information. She said, me and 3 of my sisters and brothers have thyroid cancer. My mother had thyroid cancer, and the only one they used from our family is the one that didn't have a thyroid problem for the study. Then I knew something was going on. They were stacking the study.
One of the problems was that the Energy Department didn't win that battle, and that they kept control of those studies. That was the Hanford Environmental Dose Reconstruction study, which later on was criticized significantly for underestimating areas where there were hot spots and underestimating the consumption of food by farmers, people like you, that would lower the doses. And also the government, starting in 1990, because there was a lawsuit, they started looking at these studies as a litigation defense instead of actual scientific studies. So it got very murky there for a while. But anyway, in Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton was elected, his energy secretary, Hazel O'Leary, launched a big, sort of a review of all the problems at the weapons facilities, and also human experiments that occurred throughout the country. Did you participate at all in that inquiry that Hazel O'Leary did?
Hazel O'Leary, she was a wonderful person. I really liked her. Yeah, I went to the Congress and testified in the congressional hearing. I went to the World Radiation hearing, World Radiation Victims hearings. I was very active in it, yes.
Yeah. And what was your hope at that time? What did you hope that the government would do for exposed people?
Medical care. Being farmers and being a member of the peasant class, we don't have medical insurance to speak of. That's why I'm a big pusher for Medicare for all, because I don't think they can take care of the people they've harmed. It's so vast and so large and so huge, it's almost incomprehensible. But there should be, like Bob says, probably compensation similar to what they're doing with the Hanford workers.
You became part of the Hanford litigation yourself, the big lawsuit that went on, that was filed in the early 90s and went on for 25 years. what did you, what were your hopes in joining the litigation in the first place, in joining that lawsuit? And how did you think it turned out?
Well, I hoped it would set us an example and get compensation to the people that had the thyroid cancers. My claim was denied because I didn't have thyroid cancer. And they didn't take into consideration any other ill health effects. How it turned out, the typical lawyer, the lawyers say, one of the lawyers' creed is, if you can't argue the facts, argue the process. And that's exactly what they did. They argued the process and forgot all about the victims in it, and come up with this paltry little sum to pay off a few people that they sorted through. It was just wasted effort.
And
I won't use the same word I used last time.
In the interim, too, the taxpayers ended up paying the lawyers defending the Hanford contractors about $100 million, and we all had to pay for that as taxpayers because they had been indemnified since the 1940s against any kind of lawsuit, any consequences of any lawsuit. So the Hanford contractors never paid a dime. The U.S. taxpayers paid for that defense, which you just described. Now, what do you think? What do you think?
It was a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any feelings about that? About how that, you know, how the money?
One thing I remember is John Till was a dairyman, and he saved his dairy with the selling. He became a AEC whore, sold his credibility, but saved his dairy. You remember John Till?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the header project. Yes. Well, Tom, do you think
the header project?
The lawsuit is now over, and you know, as you say, sort of not with a bang but a whimper, it ended. But do you think now that Congress should pursue other remedies for the downwinders? I mean, how would you like your story and those of your neighbors to be remembered?
Well, the books that have come out so far are all excellent books. Tommy Carver's Utopia, the Hanford Plaintiffs. I don't think you can do anything more than that. Put it in print, put it firmly in history. I still think that the downwinders should be treated the same as the workers. That's a successful program. They should be continue implementing it. The only problem with that is it's going to go on forever.
Well, Tom,
but it'll be something.
Thank you very much.
It's something.
As I said at the beginning of our conversation here, you were the first real human face of the exposed people, and you've stuck with it for all these years, and we appreciate your insights today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your interest very much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your stories, and Tricia for digging in a little deeper into your book and kind of taking us there, and Karen for, you know, how all your work in the 80s and 90s, you know, brought this to the forefront. So we really appreciate having you all here today. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.